You know,
Mm-hmm.
the
No, you're
mess
right, man.
the messages have flooded in from far and wide. And in fact, I should probably, just for clarity's sake, just start, recording on this so the people know.
Yeah.
By the way, before I hit record on this, Zencaster has a time limit per however many weeks of what we can record, just so you know. That's
Yep.
part of the new free plan. So we have to keep this under an hour and 15 minutes. So,
Great. Great.
yeah,
Zencaster's always making it challenging
that much harder, apparently. Yeah,
every time.
every update. Yeah, it's really fun. So, all right, here we
That's
go.
great.
3, 2, 1. So yeah, the messages flooded in, man. Did John and Denison break up? And
Mm-hmm.
as the band finally called it quits, the answer is no. We're still together. We have just not had a week off from this show um, since the beginning of 2021.
Yeah.
That was literally, well, probably before. I think before that too. Man, probably the middle of 2020 at least.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I would say
but,
so.
but it was just different because I remember us going into 21 and you saying, I don't want to miss a single week, you know. And we have held that all the way to now. So probably roughly 3, maybe just under 3 years we've done this without a single missed week, which is insane. I think it's a good time to start a new season, bro. Because we've kind of
Yeah,
been
I
looking
think
into
so.
this anyway. And so we'll do that on the audio side. You'll be seeing the the label differently, but still the same great taste that you've come to know and love. New look, same great taste, bro. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so yeah, we're just diving more into the world of tech and of AI as well. Of course, that does not mean this is just only going to be an AI and a tech show, but I think it
Mm-hmm.
would be fair for us to change our categorizing on our host site so that it is shared properly because it really has become a major part of who we are and what we talk about.
Yeah.
So yeah, but other than that, I mean, nothing's really changed. Yeah, podcast category right now is society and culture, with a subcategory of news commentary. Um, yeah, I think we can change that to
Yeah. We can change that up a little bit. It
yeah,
really has become, one of our bigger focuses. Of course. Um just because honestly, the last the last year has been, even the last month has been incredible when it comes to tech. Not saying that any of the other stuff um doesn't excite us and isn't stuff that we want to talk about. It's just it's kind of dominated the news cycle as well as dominated our minds. I know, if you've followed us for the past few weeks, you've noticed that we've been talking about AI for every episode. It's just because it's incredible, how impressive these tools are, but also at the rate at which they're evolving, right, and growing. And we're really at that era of just kind of where everything is kind of like the sky is the limit, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
without a doubt. Yeah, so I think it'd be good for us to continue to focus on this moving forward. But again, it's not indicative of us not talking about other things that get you talking, like has been the foundation of this show. And in fact, I kind of wanted to talk about something real quick, just mentioning it off
hmm
the top here. This is something I know we've talked about racing and especially Formula One on here before. Something that kind of blows my mind, and it's more. I would like to get our listeners' reaction to it, not necessarily whether they're a race fan or not, but about the idea of something like this happening. Right. So I'll try to lay this out as simply as possible. But Bernie Ecclestone, former president of the FIA, which is the governing body of Formula One, right? You could more or less picture this as like the NFL, but there's like a governing body that oversees the NFL, NBA, and NHL. That type of a thing, right? So this is that, but for racing. Anyway, F1 being the biggest thing of that, of course. He's very stodgy when he was leader, and he was leader for a long time. He has said multiple things, multiple publications since he stepped down from that position about what he would have done differently and this and that. So back in 2008, um, there was a race in Shanghai where a driver named Nielsen Piquet Jr. crashed on purpose to help Fernando Alonso, his teammate, win a race. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, Felipe Massa was leading the championship at that point. Okay. Lewis Hamilton, in his second season in F1, finished third that race after Ferrari, who Felipe Massa drove for, had a bad pit stop. And so what that did was put Lewis Hamilton in points position for the following race, where he made an incredible last lap pass in the rain on the final corner to finish in a high enough position to win his first ever championship. Okay. Well, there is a potential that because that race or that crash was intentional, the crash by Nielsen Piquet that benefited Fernando Alonso, that we're not
Hmm.
involved in this championship race, right? But but they weren't involved in the championship hunt, but they were all involved in the same race, right? Trying to make this as sensible as possible for non-race fans. There is a precedent that they could have canceled that race, voided it, made the points not count. But they chose not to do that and chose to move forward with it, right? Well, now Bernie Ecclestone, this guy I mentioned first, is stirring that up in the media about something that happened 15 years ago. And he says we made the wrong decision and we should have avoided that, which would have allowed Felipe Massa to have enough points to become a Formula One world championship and not champion and not give Lewis Hamilton his first championship. So now Felipe Massa is looking into legal options to try and pursue this and try and get a championship. Now, I don't like that. I don't like a lot of things about this. I'll just lay them out. I want to get your take on it, but I'll just lay it out real quick what I feel like. I feel like it's sour grapes on the part of Felipe Massa. It's 15 years ago. And what does that gain you other than a title to your name? I don't know. Maybe it gains some money. I don't know. Maybe he would get more earnings back, back pay. I don't know.
Hmm.
But what does that get you more than the title to your name? If you believe that, that's all that matters. It shouldn't matter if you have the trophy or not at this point, right?
Yeah.
But also, it just reeks of the old school mentality of Formula One, which is been around for a long time, pretty much up until around Drive to Survive. Which, if any of you are listening or watching and have any interest in Formula One, it's probably because of that show, Drive to Survive, right? Before that, decades of racism. And that is what this reeks of to me, especially from a very old white guy who is constantly talked down about Lewis Hamilton, the only black guy ever in Formula One. For him to just casually mention, "Oh yeah, we should have made a move that essentially would have prevented Lewis Hamilton from getting his first championship." I just think it's sour grapes on one hand and racism on another. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of feel I can I can kind of feel the same. I feel like it's kind of a for me, one of the biggest things is that it feels like a really just a bad integrity thing, right? It's a bad show of character, right? Sure. Um sure, they should have done something like that. They should have canceled the race or whatever like that. But you I would say most people would, instead of pursuing legal action, right, which is a kind of like a big crazy thing to
Yeah.
do, most people would say, "All right, cool. Well, let's just hope that we don't do that again," right?
Yeah.
And maybe you would work with the organization to, make sure it doesn't happen again, right?
Mm.
But I feel like pursuing legal action is so unsportsmanlike.
Yeah.
Um, and um,
To an extent, it depends on the situation, but I think in this case, when it's that long ago, yeah, I do too. I do
yeah,
too.
exactly. That's the thing. It's you said it's 15 years, right? Yeah,
2008.
15. Yeah, that's insane. 15 years is a long time. And so it doesn't make any sense for you to try to go back at that point. Honestly, I feel like in a lot of cases it's beyond like the legal statute for a lot of like criminal things, at least. I don't know how it is when it comes to like other regulations and other things like
Yeah, for
that. And of
starters,
course,
yeah,
different countries and stuff. Um, but yeah, I just feel like it's a bad show of character on his end. Um, and I think there are many other ways that you can handle it. Sure, it does suck that you may have lost a championship um rate, or a championship because of that, but at the same time, the what you have done 15 years uh after that moment is far more important than what happened in that moment or in that specific point in time. And at the same time, right, this is this was Lewis Hamilton's like first championship win. Like,
mm,
why are you now trying to, now that you learned about this, why are you now trying to ruin his effort? Because it's,
yeah,
'cause I think that's the other thing. It's not that, it's not like he won by default. No, he still had to race. He still had to perform to
that's it. Yeah,
get to the point to where he could actually win the race
that's
or
exact.
win the championship.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly what I was thinking. Is just let's say you did void that race. Well, there were still, if I remember right, other races between that and that final race of the season where he made that last lap pass, right? But maybe
Mhm.
things are approached differently. Maybe different strategy calls are made depending on the point situation at that point.
Yep.
That would still give him the chance to win that championship. And um, I think it's just a attempt to try and get the only other seven-time champion removed of his seventh championship so that there's only one guy in Formula One with the most championships of all time, and that's a white guy named Michael Schumacher.
Yep.
But the thing is, to me, interestingly, the first time we talked about Formula One on this channel was when um, Lewis Hamilton was stolen of his record-setting eighth world championship, right at the end of 2021.
Mhm.
And this is not conjecture. This is the FIA saying that the wrong decisions were made and the rules were broken to give Max Verstappen that opportunity to make a last lap pass and win that race. And so to me, I think it's just kind of funny because if they found that there was legal standing to remove Lewis Hamilton's title from 2008, then I feel like he would have legal standing to be like, okay, well, then give me my title for 2021 because that should have been voided too. The rules were
Exactly.
broken there too. So either way, he's going to be a seven-time champion.
Yep.
you know.
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting discussion to me too. And
Yeah.
this is the
Yeah.
thing. I read the comments on social media when it comes to F1. A lot of them are European, and therefore a lot of them are against Lewis Hamilton. And I don't necessarily think that that's a black thing. I don't think it has to do with the color of his skin entirely. I think it's part of it for sure.
Mhm.
But I think it's just as much that, if not also largely just because Max Verstappen is Hungarian, so it's kind of like Central Europe kind of a
Yeah.
thing. So I think it comes down to that too. But yeah, it's interesting, man.
Yeah.
Interesting
It
discussion.
is.
This is why I think, and I've said this on here before, like Drive to Survive highly dramatizes the stuff that happens during the season. I really don't think it has to. I think it really is high drama in of itself and just tells a human story, regardless, just through racing, really.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
But
But it's It's one of those things where I feel like Netflix felt like they needed to dramatize it to get people into it.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. But anyway, just want to start with that. Improve that we will continue to be more than just a tech podcast. But with the way of the
Hmm.
world, this is the way that things are going right now. So we're gonna see what we can do to rebrand and continue with the focus of our discussion. So, with all that said, um, we have a big topic that we want to talk about. Big decisions, big moves are being made to propel the EV car market moving forward, and
Hmm.
it's catching a lot of people out. A lot of people not happy about it. They want to see their gas powered vehicles go away. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have a plan to buy an EV anytime soon, but um, I see the forest for the trees. You know what I mean? So I know I'm
Hmm.
not gonna be like strapped to a bed, take my car keys, they go and sell it at CarMax, and then bring back a Prius, right? So,
Hmm.
so it's not gonna be like that. But we want to talk about all this. We're gonna intro it, but first we're gonna intro us. Let's go ahead and get into it. Yeah. All right.
Oh man, that was great.
That was great, man. All right. Let's go ahead and roll this thing. Three,
Do it.
because I'm getting hungry up in this joint.
Me too.
Three, three, two, one. What's going on, everybody? I'm John,
And I'm Dennison.
and this is the catch up. Yeah, that came from the diaphragm. That came from the gut.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. I'm just checking. We're good to go. Sweet. All right. Three, two, one. Before we get into our topics, we want to remind you the three best ways to support us. They have not changed over the season shift. There you go. Neither have our visual aids. Number one, you want number one, you want to jump on our live stream. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube every week. You can make sure you get on that notification gang so you can jump into discussion with us in real time. Is what we love about this show is the ability to connect with you and discuss with you about these cutting edge things as they happen, and hear your thoughts on all of them and what you want to hear us talk about. It's a great way for us to expand our catch up and catch up with you. So yeah, please jump over there. It's linked wherever you're listening, and or just type in the name of our podcast on either platform. Number two is to leave a rating and review. There you go. Well, that's kind of deceiving because it has two lenses, so it could be three, but I think we're looking at two there. Okay, so number two is to leave us a rating and review wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching. That helps the algorithms share our show with more potential listeners. And subscribe if you like us. All would really help us out. That's probably the absolute simplest way you could help us grow. Just take 5 seconds of your time, please. We would really appreciate it. And then number three, if you want to support us in a monetary fashion, oh, there you go. Just in case you forgot, you need a mnemonic device. Um, number three is to jump over to our shop and buy our merch and apparel. Shop it. Check it out. We got an Etsy page, man. Got the whole thing. So we got
Hmm.
t-shirts. If it's still a little chilly in your neck of the woods, we still got hoodies. We still got long sleeves, but we got hats, beanies, all kinds of things. So you want to check it out. It's a great way to help support us monetarily and get you something nice or a loved one, perhaps. So, all right, man. Let's go ahead and jump into this. Kind of set the stage. I know it's the Biden administration changes. Set the stage with what this looks like and what it means.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, yeah, the Biden administration came out with kind of like a more revised plan, right? Because I think we talked about this a few months back when the Biden administration came out with kind of like a very big, detailed plan of exactly how they wanted to see the automotive industry as well as our infrastructure industry to move forward into a more cleaner, sustainable future, right? And so some of that was charging infrastructure, and then some of that was the plan to lower the amount of gas powered vehicles being produced, right?
Yeah.
So originally, the plan was to have it was I think it's 50 about 50% of all vehicles sold in the United States to be EVs. So he wanted by 2030. He wanted that. Um,
Okay.
so the new revised plan is to have, I think it's somewhere around 60% or something like that. I think it's close, it's like two-thirds or whatever like that of all vehicles being sold to be EVs, electric vehicles. And to be more specific, they're also American made electric vehicles. The
Okay.
other thing.
But but that's not just all, right?
Yes.
Because you can have we've had this for a while, right? Where it's like General Motors American made, but it's the engines are made in Mexico and it's assembled in Canada, or flip that, right?
Hmm.
But with this stipulation, the EVs have to be assembled in America, right? So all
Correct.
the parts have to come here and it's put together here.
Correct, correct. And I think there is some wording in there of wanting to also have battery production, a certain portion of the battery production to be here as well.
Okay.
So maybe not the materials, of course, but parts of the battery to be assembled here as well. So,
Yeah.
um, very, very big push to have everything American made.
Which
I
that's
think
great for jobs. That's why they're doing that, you know?
yes, exactly. Yeah, it creates a lot of jobs as well as it makes it so that we are not as reliant on foreign powers for our automotive industry, right? We're
Yeah.
not as reliant on any of that, and we are able to push forward, right? Because I guess that's one of the biggest things, right? Us moving over from oil and gas, right, to battery powers, we actually have the opportunity to fully um, remove ourselves from being dependent on outside uh, supply chains.
Right.
Like how we have to be kind of sort of dependent on our fuel or oil and gas currently. So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what the biggest part of this plan is to be so much more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Um, and it also creates stability within our own ecosystem when it comes to what prices and stuff like that because if you don't have to worry about other manufacturers when it comes to most of the parts and components of your vehicle, you can thereby keep your prices at a far more stable portion instead of having to increase them because of demands saying, "Oh, well, I can't get these parts, so I have to increase demand here to get more margins," or whatever like that.
Yeah.
Um, so, so yeah, that's one of the biggest things. This plan also, I should say, the two-thirds portion is now that goalpost is at 2032,
Okay.
which is a pretty aggressive timeline,
Very aggressive.
as you can already think of. Um, so that is, it's we're already looking at 2030 it being at 54%, and so now that's jumping even more by 2030, or sorry, 2032. So it's really hard push. And then you also have to think about it that these manufacturers, they're having to retool factories, right, for this shift.
Yeah.
Um, because it's not saying that manufacturers haven't already started the process of this, right? I think Ford, for instance, is already trying to push for stopping the sale of gas powered vehicles by 2030.
Yeah.
And I think um, the Biden the Biden administration's main goal is to have all gas powered vehicles stopped by 2050. So,
Right. And you know why Ford's doing that. And this is
mm,
actually, oh man, I mean to veer off on this so
no
quick.
worries.
But That's really interesting because we know how big of a deal big business is in lobbying for presidential candidates.
Hmm.
Especially since Citizens United, where corporations are people, so they can funnel their money like we do. Um, and So for Ford to be lobbying for a candidate that would push for something more aggressive like that, because they have done away with all gas powered vehicles for production, except for right the F-150. They'll still have a non electric version of it, and then the Mustang,
Hmm.
right? Um, and eventually
They've
those
already,
will change. Wait, what?
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah. You also have they now have a electric version of the transit van. I
Yeah,
think it's the e-transit, so that's already kind of become electrified.
yeah,
And so yeah, they'll
which
continue down that road.
yeah, and those are a little less consumer, a little more corporate.
Hmm.
But as far as straight consumer, all they have are the Mustang and the F-150. Now, granted, those are their two highest sellers.
Yeah.
But or well, I would assume so with the Mustang. I know the F-150 is, of course, but that is really interesting because they will, in fact, be screwed if gas powered vehicles are allowed to be sold. Now, let me ask you something. I have one more thing I wanted to say on this, but I have a question first.
Mm. Yep.
Is there a penalty if they don't reach these metrics? I'm looking here: two-thirds of new passenger cars and a quarter of new heavy trucks. So
Hmm.
three-quarter ton trucks, probably more than that though. Heavy trucks. It really depends on what they mean by heavy trucks, because that could still be like consumer, like three-quarter ton or 1 ton pickups, or
Yeah.
it could be like your heavy machinery hauling trucks.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be heavy machinery trucks because they do take up a big portion of our roadways and they do put out a lot of emissions.
Yeah,
Because ultimately a lot of this is to curb emissions as
yeah,
quickly as possible.
right.
Um,
Well, so with that said, though, what's the penalty there if they don't meet those metrics by 2032?
at least reading through the article that we have, I haven't seen any specific penalty. I think there's going to be like fines and stuff like that if they're not able to meet those, similar to the fines that auto manufacturers already kind of get when it comes to the guidelines for EPA specific ratings, right? So, as it is currently, right, there is already a mandate for an auto manufacturer to have an average of a certain EPA rating.
Okay.
I think I think right now it's like 30 miles per gallon. I
Yep.
think is somewhere close. So in
Across
total,
all of its vehicles. Yeah. Hmm.
correct. Yeah, exactly. Across all of its vehicles, it has to have 30 mpg average,
Combined.
right? Yeah, combined average.
Hmm.
Um, so I would imagine otherwise they get a fine or some sort of penalty. So I would imagine it's the same kind of deal where they'll get a penalty for having this. And these are not, you know, to scoff at fines. These aren't cheap. And
Yeah.
so it's something that they want to do. And the other thing that you have to really think about is that the United States is not the only government body that is pushing for uh, this EV change or this EV shift. There are other governing bodies in Europe that are also pushing for this. So it would be very painful for a lot of these auto manufacturers to say, not hit these goals and targets because a lot of these goals are very much aligned with some of the goals that are over in Europe.
Yeah.
So they're going to get double fined essentially, or they'll have a possibility of being double fined if they aren't able to keep up with this demand or this push.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a great point too. European Union fines, in addition to, um, I guess, EPA fines. Um,
Hmm.
but this is the biggest thing to me. And nothing that we haven't talked about. Yeah, I am thinking this as I read on here. It's talking about three-quarter and 1 ton trucks for the 25% sold to be all electric in 2032. That's
Mm.
going to be a harder metric to meet because they will be hauling stuff so much and you need a longer range with that.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
Often, but and I see that especially. Think of when you stop at a gas station, right? How many of those times during the day, during the workday, how much of those vehicles are work trucks? You know, they
Mhm.
get filled up a lot, and so they're going to need to have a extended range for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
or increased charging times, or, I should say decreased charging times, right? Because that's
yeah,
the other way, right? If you're able to push a huge amount of energy into the battery packs, and decrease your charging time from, say, I don't know, 20 minutes or 15 minutes to 5 minutes, then the range does matter, but it doesn't matter as much because you can charge at a faster rate.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, Man, so this is kind of the biggest thing to me, though. So they're moving that way, right? Not all of these cars are going to be electric, right? Now, granted, 67% is a lot.
Mhm.
Um, but less in the last year, just 5.8% of new cars that were sold were electric. And just 2% of trucks that were sold were electric. Now, the truck thing is relatively new. So that's that. But for it to be less than 6%, and you're going to be selling 66.7% electric cars, I feel like that puts the market at risk, you know.
Mm.
And if things weren't to change, now they will, the manufacturer is going to do everything in their power to make electric look appealing. But I think it's going to have to be more than advertisement. It's going to have to be an increase in technology, increase in charging capabilities in areas.
Mhm. Charging infrastructure and so on.
Yeah, just real steps forward to make it easy for people.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
plus a lot more government incentives. Um,
yes, yeah, exactly. Because that's if nothing were to change, I mean, then the car industry is going to fall on its head. I mean, Chevrolet canceled the Camaro again. They're gonna make it EV and they're gonna bring it back,
oh, yeah.
of course. Um, but yeah, so everybody's going all in on this, you know.
Yeah, they have to. I think one of the other things about it is that the amount of money that they have to put into retooling and changing and stuff like that also has to be reflected in the prices of the vehicles. One thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, right, is the margins that these auto manufacturers actually have. It's really interesting because I saw a graph the other day that kind of showed like a lot of the auto manufacturers when it comes to electric vehicles, at least that they produce currently, right? Especially since it's still most electric vehicles are still pretty much on the cutting edge, right? So a lot of the money is still in R&D and
Yeah,
less in manufacturing prowess and figuring out ways to decrease the amount of money. I think the
sure.
only one right now who is a relatively big market leader when it comes to margins of their vehicles is Tesla. And I
Mhm.
think that's the reason why if you've noticed in the past few weeks and months, they've been putting out some very aggressive price cuts and changes to try to really eat at their competition. I think one of the biggest things that I noticed in this graph was the Mach E. Ford is actually losing money um,
Oh, really?
on yeah on every Mach E produced. I think it's somewhere around $200 or something like that. That
Really?
they're yeah every Mach E that they produce, they're losing about $200. But it's to get into the market cap or get into the market, right? You have to
Yeah,
do this. Now, of course, over time, that cost is going to go down because you get better. You're able to source materials better. You're able to manufacture better because you've created things better. It's as time goes on, you're going to figure out how to do it, just like the internal combustion engine. But I think that is also one of the biggest problems, at least for consumers, too, is the price, right? Because
yeah,
if you're already not making any money you can't lower your price anymore than it already is. And EV, I think the average EV price right now is somewhere around 63, $64,000
Oh wow.
um,
Yeah.
across just that's sold currently. So
Right.
that's a huge undertaking for most consumers to be able to afford. Where the average now, where the average gasoline powered car is, I think somewhere around $49,000, which is still a lot, but compared to an EV prices, right? Your average EV prices. Now, of course, this is across multiple manufacturers and stuff like that. But anyway, it's still a lot. And
Well, yeah. I mean, $15,000 on an average market value is a lot for a lot of people. They can't
yeah,
just, and you're right, you get those incentives too, but they don't always all go through, and you have to wait for the kickbacks to hit. Um, you know, yeah, I think, I don't know, it's something I've thought about, but I bet people would look back or look past the range, the charging capabilities right now if vehicles were cheaper. Like I bet
yeah,
if they were equivalently priced to gas powered or even cheaper, I bet you people would be like, "Oh yeah, I love electric vehicles," and buy them. You know, you'd
yeah.
have a
No,
higher uptake for sure.
yeah. Well, I mean, well, the only reason why I say maybe not fully is because
Yeah,
the Nissan Leaf. Now, of course, it didn't come out super cheap. I think when it first came out, it was somewhere in the 40s, right?
yeah,
Um, but the range was abysmal.
yep, it's true.
And even the current generation Leaf it still doesn't have great range. So I do
Yeah,
think it still is a factor, but I think it needs to if an auto manufacturer can come out with a $25,000 car that has a range of like say 250 miles, I think I think you're right. Most people would not care
yeah,
about the range or anything like that. 250 miles is plenty for someone who is going around town. And I know a lot of people, and we've talked about this. A lot of people love to say, like, "Oh, well, if I wanted to go on a road trip, I need to have all the range that I can get." And sure, that is technically true, but the thing is, you're not going on a road trip every single day.
no, definitely
you're
not.
not you're not using 250 miles of range every single day.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and yeah, like we were talking about off camera too. Like you can still. Chances are you didn't drive without stopping in your gas powered vehicle either. So you're still going to have to stop in your electric vehicle. Now, granted, you're going to want to make sure there are charging stations that are available and accessible to you along those routes that you typically travel.
Mhm.
Um, but man, yeah, that is really kind of the biggest thing. Is other than that, it's really no different than driving your gas powered vehicle, especially from me experiencing those tier 2 charging stations with you. That's not even bad. 10, 12, 14 minutes for a full charge on your vehicle. But then if you go to a tier 3 charging system, you're in and out in 1, 2, 3 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, it's honestly probably equal to, if not faster than gas powered. Now, of course, it's harder on your battery to charge it up faster like that. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of options and opportunities there. I was wondering too. I don't know. Is there any pushback from any? And this is kind of a direction change, but is there any pushback that you've seen from auto manufacturers about this new regulation? Is there anybody that's like no? Because we mentioned Ford wants to do it faster. Uh, is there anyone that's like, oh, it's too soon?
Um, Honestly, I haven't seen too many manufacturers like in defiance. I think most manufacturers that I've seen right now that have some sort of issue with the bill is have been foreign manufacturers. And the main reason why they have an issue with the bill is because of the American made stipulation, right?
Right.
So something like Hyundai and Kia, for instance, for their EVs, the issue for them is that they don't. get to participate in the tax credit because the tax credit, the newest version of the tax credit, is very specific on it being an American made vehicle.
Yeah.
And sure, Hyundai, I think currently their EVs right now are not being assembled in the United States at all. So if you were to go out and buy, say, an Ionic 5 or an Ionic 6 currently, you can't get the 7,500 um dollar tax credit. You just can't take part in that. So it does kind of cause issues for auto manufacturers that don't have assembly plants for their EVs, because that's the other thing, right? You can't just it costs a lot of money to be able to retool your factories that are currently here. Hyundai has manufacturing plants here in the United States, but they don't have ones for EVs. To retool, say, those current factories, one, it's going to cause them issues because now you're retooling it away from gasoline powered vehicles, which are still selling, um, and turning that now into an AV plant.
Mhm.
That comes with, different robots, different all sorts of things, and you also have to train the labor force. So there's a whole different change there,
Yeah.
um, as well as how you're going to move your suppliers and stuff like that. So I would say most of the pushback is on the incentive side, right? The manufacturers that don't have EV operations currently in the United States are having far more difficulties getting to that point, especially being able to get to that point in the short amount of time that this new proposed plan has alluded to.
Yeah. Well, I know we didn't plan to talk about this, but this kind of goes into my next question. Does this sound like the basis for some legal grounds? Because to me, it does. Um, I could see lawsuits forming by a conglomerate of those auto manufacturers coming together, basically saying that this is a roundabout way of stamping them out in favor of a U.S. made monopoly. You know,
Mhm.
certain people may not have a problem with that, but it is a global market now, not a country or nationwide market. So something like this could affect global markets for sure. Um, I don't know. That seems like something I could see a lot of pushback on because if people are going to say, "Hey, it looks like we have to get an EV," um, then I think that we're going to get one that we get a tax credit on, and it's not going to be those foreign manufacturers where they get less money back. You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, it's interesting because I kind of see this similar to back in the, what was it, I think it was 60s, maybe 70s, when the ban of importing vehicles from essentially vehicles that weren't built in America, or it was something similar to that. It was
Yeah.
the importing of vehicles from, say, Europe or whatever like that,
Hmm.
for the stoppage of that and creating that 5-year rule. If you've ever heard of it, same reason, if you've ever heard of it before, the US currently still has a 25-year rule to where you can't import a vehicle that isn't for the US market into the United States,
Yeah.
right? Um, until it's 25 years old. And so I will say that this new proposed plan and bill, is very reminiscent of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I can see the legal grounds of something similar to that, saying like, hey, like you said, this gives the American made brands an advantage. Now, back then that was also the same thing. It was built to be an advantage to kind of help, um what was it, level the playing field at that time.
Right. Right.
And but I think the biggest problem right now is that back then it was to level the playing field because American auto manufacturers in some ways were lacking and were falling behind, and the
The quality and stuff.
European, yeah, and so they weren't able to kind of offer the same pricing, all sorts of stuff. And so I can see, or I guess the difference is that I would say most auto manufacturers currently right now, other than the big 3 EV brands that have popped up in recent years, that be Tesla, Rivian, and Lucid,
Yeah,
all of them, of course, already have the advantage. But I would say when it comes to other manufacturers, everybody else is already on the same playing field. And then creating a, a bill or proposing a bill or a plan to force it to be everything to be American made, that gives that makes it unbalanced when it comes to manufacturing for everyone else. So I can see them banding together and creating some sort of, maybe not a uh, maybe something like a lobbying arm. I can see a lobbying arm, which I think has already kind of started, honestly, because of seeing how the tax credit has changed quite a bit
yeah,
from when it was first proposed. I think it's now at the third or fourth revision, um, of when it was first proposed, earlier this, I think it was earlier this year or a little bit last year or late last year. Um,
sure.
so yeah, I can see something like that. I can see more of a lobbying arm than a actual like legal battle.
Yeah, I can see that too, especially since this is still a bill, right? I think it's clear.
Yeah,
Right? We should be clear on that. It's not a law.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. It's all still has to go through
Congress.
review and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah, it has to go through Congress because it was proposed by the Biden administration. Now,
Correct.
what's well, it's kind of a sidebar, but one of our good friends, Trenton, speaking of the gray market, which is essentially what you're talking about. Um,
Mhm.
well, it's a little different. It's a little different, but cars that are not legally sold in the U.S., but you can get them shipped to the U.S. He has an R32 Nissan Skyline that's right-hand drive
Mhm.
and manual. He just got that. Pretty amazing.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, and it's my favorite. That weird caramel brown color they have. It's so cool, man. Um, but yeah. Anyway, so that's a great point that you brought up with that, though, is that these kind of games have been being played for a long time. Again, rather than you know American auto manufacturers picking themselves up by the bootstraps, they punished other car manufacturers so they could slowly improve their quality. Because you're right, I would say for trucks, I think the '90s were peak for trucks.
Oh yeah.
Uh, at least for you can't honestly say that for durability and for mileage and for what the engines can do. But if you combine those things with the looks of that era, yeah, I don't know, undefeated to me. But um, I will say that outside of that, the cars were trash, and cars maintained or pretty much continued to be trash. They picked up quality a little bit through the 2000s, but it wasn't great. And really wasn't until the 2010s that things started to really pick up again, pick up quickly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and that was a lot of that was off of rulings coming from the financial crisis and, these
exactly
auto
what I was.
manufacturers having to be bailed out. Oh, my bad. See, we were already on the same
Yeah.
thought process.
No, you're good. You're all good. That's exactly what I was about to say. Is that was a result of a bailout of which these car companies willingly took part in, and that made them collapse in this economic recession. They needed bailed out, and it put them not just back on good footing. I mean, yes, Ford and General Motors had to cut companies that they own, right? but what came out of that were a lot better products. So this seems like gaming the system, and gaming the system in a big business sort of way that's been going on for a long time. And that includes right now with, for example, as we mentioned earlier in this podcast, Ford wanting these rules to take effect earlier so they don't go under, with their aggressive launch toward electric vehicles.
Yep.
But again, not to mention about how that would affect every car company that's not Ford, General Motors, or Stellantis.
Yep.
Because even though
Yeah.
Stellantis is European based, um, the stipulation is the cars have to be assembled in the United States. They can still continue to build them in Europe like they do some of their cars, but assemble them here, you know.
Yep.
Um, so it's interesting. Like I said, it's like a continuation of that. I don't know. I see personally, I see some changes coming to this. This bill, this proposal. Um, Yeah, I get that this is in an effort to quote head off a climate catastrophe.
Yep.
But as we talked about before, there are a number of pieces to that puzzle that have to come together. It's not this is just one.
Correct.
Um
Correct.
and so I think that there has to be, if you're going this aggressive on consumer vehicles, you have to go really aggressive on other stuff too.
Yep.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah. Because a lot of commercial vehicles are also big pollutants, and there's also tons of other things that are out there. Um, I will say that I think one other thing that I wanted to note in this plan was also to um, force a manufacturer warranty of like 8 years, 8 years and 80,000 miles on the drivetrain of these EVs that'll be produced. So essentially, of course, your drive units, but also your battery pack
Mm,
to have to last that long, just as like a mandated um, quality deal.
gotcha.
And that was done as an effort to make sure that you don't get these poorly made or hastily made vehicles that aren't going to last no more than like 5 years or something
Right.
similar to.
And then the batteries end up that was another complaint I've seen a lot lately, is how the batteries will end up affecting our environment, polluting our environment, all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think it is important to point that out, that there are going to be a number of strides in this technology,
Yep.
and because there have to be. I don't think any of us can accept um, that type of a thing, of it damaging not only our economy but our environment, doing just as much bad as it's doing good. We've talked about
Correct.
this. There are a number of possible solutions to the climate issue caused by gas powered vehicles. I saw a video just the other day, um, about a guy who adjusted, because diesel engines with some adjustment can run off of entirely different things. Diesel, in and of itself, the original engine ran off of peanut oil, right? Imagine stopping at your local Chick-fil-A and filling up your vehicle, you know?
Hmm.
Uh, and so, uh, yeah, that's this guy adjusted his diesel engine, his Ford F-250, created something. This was a TikTok video, so it was not in depth about how this worked. But all I know is that the system in the back generated the engine, or it did, not the engine, generated the
You.
fuel, and it was
Mhm.
entirely solar powered. Um, and so self-sustaining, I'm assuming non-pollutant if it's creating something like that.
Mhm.
um, that's amazing. And of course it took up,
Yeah.
about a fifth of his bed space, so it's not um ideal, probably, but that's just the first step into something that could be revolutionary. I think it's just amazing, the ideas that could come out if we're really, again, I think this ends up uh, painting an image in my mind of this is a stopgap.
Yep.
this rush towards electric vehicles. At the very least, a stopgap. Again, this technology could take off. We could end up being able to drive from New York to San Francisco on one charge. The batteries could be biodegradable. There's all sorts of things that could happen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, right now they're already working on different versions of how the battery chemistry is, right? Instead of it being, I think one of the biggest things of it was removing the graphite that's in a lot of these batteries and adding silicone instead of that because it's a much more abundant resource and easier to get, as well as the properties having the potential of increasing range, exponentially. So it's,
Yeah.
there's tons of stuff. So sure, the current version of EVs that we see now are for sure not going to be the versions that we will have, in, 5, 10 years from now, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be completely different just because the needs are going to be there, and when you get more research and development dollars going into this stuff, you get a lot more very innovative technologies to come out of it, especially with the push of AI. Seeing AI driven solutions to problems that we currently have, I can also see an exponential growth in that as well.
Yeah. Well, definitely the collaboration on these developments are going to see things that we used to think be 5 to 10 years out, um, be less than that. And then, continue to shorten that gap. I think to your point too, what you said about the race for expanding these electric vehicle technologies, again, these are things we would talk about that would typically be 10, 15, 20 years out. It really is going to be less than that, partly because mostly because it has to be 5 to 10. You know, you're right. Cars 5 years now, 10 years now, they're not going to act the same. They're not going to have the same electric qualities. It's going to be interesting to see what the haters say when that comes around, what their excuse against buying EV will be then.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. Yeah, I know. And speaking of technology too, I mean, I was at this open streets event today in Wichita, and it was by WSU, the university, and so their gosh, what department is this? Um, Innovation Labs. They partnered with Boston Dynamics and
Mm.
had a robot dog that they brought out into the streets and just had walking around.
Wow,
It
that's
was
crazy.
amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. They had a robot that ran on tracks and looked exactly like Wally. That was really cool. Um, from the Pixar movie. But this was, yeah, this was a full on, it was painted yellow and black, the Wichita State colors. And it was a full on dog. And it's pretty amazing. It's really cool. Not something you would think that you would see college students being able to, in Wichita, being able to play with, but
Hmm.
and learn from. But yeah, I mean, this is just the rate at which our technology is advancing these days. It's that shareable.
Yeah.
That quickly. So, anyway, I think we had a good discussion on this, man. I think this was a good one. Um, I'm glad we touched on it. If you guys want to continue to listen to more of this show, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching. Leave us a rating review. That'll let us know how we're doing and really continue to help us to grow. Um, we thank you for checking out the show. Thank you for enduring our week off as well. We
Hmm.
look forward to bringing you many more weeks of fun, informative, good content, and catching up, of course, because that is the name of this show. So, with that said, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch up with you next week.